Freedom doesn't always arrive with noise or applause. Sometimes it begins in the quiet surrender of no longer needing to be understood. It's the moment you exhale the weight of constant explanation, of trying to make others see what only you can feel. You stop pleading for validation, stop adjusting your truth to fit the comfort of others. Stop translating your soul into a language small enough for those unwilling to listen. It's not arrogance, it's liberation. Because understanding, as beautiful as it sounds, is often the heaviest chain the awakened soul carries. Viktor Frankl once said that meaning is not something to be given by others, it's something to be discovered within. And yet, for much of life, we search for mirrors instead of meaning. We want to be understood because we confuse understanding with belonging. We think if someone could truly see our heart, our pain, our purpose, we would finally be safe. But Frankl would remind you, the search for meaning is not a collective event. It's an inner pilgrimage, and those who walk that path rarely find company at every step. The truth is, not everyone can understand your calling because it wasn't given to them. Not everyone can grasp your transformation because they haven't lived your breaking. People can only meet you at the depth they've met themselves. When you grow beyond their frame of reference, your silence becomes threatening. Your peace becomes misinterpreted. Your solitude mistaken for arrogance. But that's not your burden to carry. You're not here to be understood. You're here to become whole. Andrew Huberman might say that the craving to be understood is a primal survival mechanism. The human brain, through millennia, has wired belonging to safety. When you explain yourself, when you seek approval, your nervous system is simply trying to regulate through connection. You're saying, please see me so I can feel safe again. But as you evolve, you begin to realize that not every form of safety is freedom. Sometimes what feels like connection is really control. And when you stop outsourcing your emotional balance to others' perception, something changes deep in your biology. Your body learns that solitude doesn't mean danger, that silence doesn't mean rejection. You begin to self-regulate, and your peace stops depending on being understood. Napoleon Hill would call this mental independence, the hallmark of every self-directed mind. Hill taught that no one achieves greatness while seeking constant validation. The great ones, Edison, Lincoln, Tesla, were misunderstood in their time because their vision extended beyond collective comprehension. Hill believed that the majority live by opinions, while the minority live by purpose. And when you live by purpose, misunderstanding becomes inevitable. The question is not whether others see your vision, but whether you trust it enough to keep walking when they don't. Neville Goddard would explain it differently, yet arrive at the same truth. He'd tell you that the need to be understood keeps you trapped in the reality you're trying to transcend. Because every time you seek validation, you're affirming doubt. You're saying, I need your belief to confirm my own. But faith, as Goddard taught, is the art of assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled, of knowing it's already done, even when no one else can see it. The one who no longer needs to be understood has already stepped into creation. They've stopped arguing with the world and started imagining it differently. Frankl would smile at that, because he knew that freedom is not found in convincing others, but in choosing meaning despite them. In his time, people couldn't understand how a man could find purpose inside a concentration camp. Yet he did. He refused to let others' perception define his reality. He found meaning in suffering, and that meaning became his liberation. When you no longer need others to understand your pain, your purpose, or your peace, you reclaim your power to define them. At first, though, this kind of freedom feels like loss. You'll lose people who only love the version of you they could comprehend. You'll watch conversations die where your silence is mistaken for distance. You'll see old circles fade because you no longer play the role they wrote for you. The ego panics here. It screams, I'm disappearing. But the soul whispers, you're finally appearing. Huberman might say that this shift, from external to internal validation, creates measurable changes in the brain. Dopamine, once dependent on social feedback, begins to stabilize. The reward system starts firing not from approval, but from alignment. You feel grounded in your own direction. Your energy becomes consistent. And ironically, that consistency makes you magnetic. Not because you try to be understood, but because your peace becomes undeniable. Napoleon Hill would recognize this as the zone of mastery. When the mind becomes impervious to opinion, creativity flourishes. You no longer censor yourself for acceptance. You express yourself for impact. You move from defense to design. Hill's principle of definiteness of purpose was precisely this. A state where you no longer waver based on external voices. You've decided who you are, and the world adjusts accordingly. Neville Goddard would add that those who misunderstand you are merely reflecting the old assumptions you've outgrown. Don't fight them, love them, bless them, but move on. The more you explain, the more you anchor yourself to an old frequency. The moment you stop needing to explain, the world must rise to meet your new vibration. Silence becomes your alignment. Understanding follows later, sometimes years later, sometimes never. But that's not your concern. Your only task is to remain faithful to the truth you've seen. Frankl would call this integrity, the courage to live your values even when no one applauds them. He would tell you that maturity is when your life stops being a debate and becomes a declaration. You're not here to persuade, you're here to embody. Meaning, he'd say, is not understood through explanation, but through example. But it takes time to reach this quiet freedom. The path is full of moments when your truth isolates you, when your peace feels misunderstood as pride, when your boundaries are called selfishness. You'll feel the sting of misinterpretation. You'll want to defend yourself, to make them see your heart. And yet, each time you resist that impulse, your strength deepens. Each silence becomes a statement of trust. I no longer need your permission to exist as I am. Huberman might note that this act of restraint reshapes your nervous system's baseline. When you no longer react to misunderstanding, you signal safety to your brain. You teach your body that confusion from others is not a threat. You start living in coherence, your thoughts, emotions, and actions aligned. That coherence radiates as peace, and people can feel it even if they don't understand it. Hill would say you've reached emotional maturity, the state where external turbulence no longer shakes inner direction. You become unoffendable, unshaken, unbothered. Your focus is forward, your energy is creative, your vision unpolluted by noise. The more others misunderstand you, the more clarity you find. Because misunderstanding forces you to define yourself more precisely. And Goddard would remind you that this is the essence of creation itself, to imagine boldly in a world that still doubts. Every misunderstood visionary, every misunderstood heart, is simply living one chapter ahead of collective awareness. So don't grieve when others can't see what you see. Their confusion is just time catching up to your faith. The most powerful souls in history lived with this freedom. Jesus, misunderstood by his own people. Galileo by his world. Frankl by his captors. Hill by his peers. Goddard by his critics. Yet all of them shared one thing in common. They stopped seeking to be understood and started living in alignment with their truth. Their peace didn't depend on comprehension. It flowed from conviction. So when someone misreads your silence, or your solitude, or your peace, let them. When they twist your intentions, let them. When they doubt your path, bless them, and keep walking. The need to correct others is the last illusion of control. Freedom begins when you release it. Because the truth is, those meant to understand you already do, without explanation. They feel your energy before you speak. They sense your authenticity without translation. And those who don't, they're simply not meant to yet. When you no longer need to be understood, you begin to live for truth, not applause. You begin to express, not impress. You move from trying to be seen to simply seeing. Your conversations deepen, your circle narrows, your peace expands. You become rooted, not restless, still, not stagnant, invisible to the noise, but radiant to the real. And in that quiet freedom, life begins to unfold differently. You no longer rush to prove. You allow time to reveal. You no longer beg to be seen. You let presence speak for you. You no longer fear misunderstanding. You understand yourself, and that's enough. Frankl would call that meaning. Huberman would call it regulation. Hill would call it self-mastery. Goddard would call it faith fulfilled. But beyond all names, it's peace. The rarest kind, the kind that doesn't require translation. So when you reach the day where you no longer crave to be understood, smile. You've crossed the invisible line between needing approval and embodying truth. You've stopped performing life and started living it. And from that moment forward, everything changes. Because the soul that no longer needs to be understood is finally, beautifully free.